Dear listeners, sorry about any confusion. The first book is called Cush Sovereignty, Black Righteousness, and the ability on the site for me to keep up with my content and to remember the language. It listed as Inglés Libro 1, which means English language, Black Righteousness Chapter 1 and the title of that chapter. Book 2 is listed, Cush Sovereignty 2, Black Love / English BL 1. Book 3, Abooksigun, The Other Side of Nowhere, which will be out next month, will be listed as Cush Sovereignty 3, / English Abook 1. And lastly, Book 4, I Am Cush, will be Cush Sovereignty 4, / English Cush 1. I hope this helps and gain. I'm sorry for the confusion. Also, please help me by hitting the thumbs up button and sharing this with family and friends on Facebook or any other platform you use. It will help me build up my channel and allow me to put more content out as well as better videos. Please let me if you see any errors. I'm doing all this work myself and sometimes when I'm tired, I mess up. Chapter 13, Jala and Anaya. Banchinikibu and Chin's twins Jala and Anaya grew up as warriors and were trained in their gifts early. Jala loved animals, and Anaya had a great passion for music and the arts. She was also a talented dancer. By the age of 10, both twins had mastered their gifts. Banchinikibu and Chin's family grew as well. Their first set of twins was Jala and Anaya, then they had Pilais and Kamusu, and the second set of twins was Mesut and Sabaka. Then there were Tanesu, Mekhai, and Abooksigun. Banchinikibu educated his children at home, and the eldest taught the youngest, and they were also sent to school. They learned about different cultures and languages. If we saw them interested in anything, we encouraged them in those subjects as well, but most important to him, he taught them his people's history as well. One day, when Banchinikibu was teaching the twins, he stood in front of the room. European countries were much smaller than the United States and Canada. The population of Europe did not include Russia, but it was almost twice the population of the United States, so it was more densely populated. Europe sent mostly criminals to this new world and introduced this side of the world to their greed and sickness. They took our people, made them forget who they were, and made them into a savage nation through mental and physiological means. After 400 years, they created mental and psychological zombies. They had the privilege of raping, murdering, and dehumanizing them into an unrecognizable species. Then refused to give them reparations for the disaster they created. Ironically, the African Moors taught them how to be civilized, and in return, they went to their country and stole their people, and those people became as they once were. Because of laziness and greed for power, our people became sad examples of men. They created laws to keep our people down. They would steal, kill and rape us, men and women alike, and then say, "I'm sorry, we won't do it again," and if we did the same to just one of them, they would kill us or lock us up for 20 to 30 years. The fear created in our people would seem like we would treat each other with more respect, living in that kind of hell together, but they would treat each other with such disrespect but treat their oppressors with loyalty. That was centuries ago, and now there's another oppressor, but I need you to remember one thing. If you remember nothing else, I say, don't treat hatred with hate. You're not called to hate, but love one another. 9-year-old, Jala raised her hand. Pops, why is this stuff so important? We're talking about thousands of years ago. Banchinikibu smiled and walked toward Jala, shaking his head. Jala, Jala, Jala. Anaya started laughing at Jala, thinking she was in trouble. Banchinikibu took a seat in front of them. Why don't we read the Torah? Some of our stories were thousands of years before that. Baby, history is in the Torah. Why don't we learn anything? We learn for wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. So, learn from your mistakes or repeat them. You see, they led to our people and told us that Europeans were the pioneers of early human civilization. They led at every chance they could get. For example, when Ethiopians defeated the well-armed Italian army. Newspapers in the United Kingdom and Estados Unidos reported that the Ethiopians were weak, so the people wouldn't know that Bacatilians defeated them. Evidence shows that half of humanity's recorded history had passed before anyone in Europe could even read and write. The religious priests in Egypt began keeping records as far back as 4000 to 3000 BC, compared to 2000 years later, when Homer's poems were still being handed down orally within the confines of the Greek city-states. Sometime after 3000 BC, when the pharaohs of Egypt built their first world-renowned pyramids, Europeans were piling up nothing more than mountains of rubbish heaps. History reveals that famous well-known Greeks and Europeans, whom we studied their history and writings, learned at the feet of Egyptian scholars along the Nile Valley, Kemet. Sales was one of the first Greek students to receive training under Egyptian priests. Even Plato records that Sales was schooled in Egypt under the tutelage of the priests. Yes, even Plato was a student at the Temple of Basset for 11 years, Aristotle for 17 years, Socrates for 15 years, Euclid for almost 11 years, Pythagoras spent 22 years, and Hippocrates studied there for 20 years. Honestly, all of them attended Basset. Diodorus, Solon, Sales, Archimedes, and Euripides. Abooksigun knelt in front of Jala. It took 40 years to graduate from Basset, meaning none of the so-called Greek scholars ever graduated. They are considered dropouts. Many people doubt that the famous phrase, "Man know thyself," was initially written and spoken by Socrates, the Greek philosopher. However, ancient Egyptians were the first to write those words down on the outside of their temple in the Nile Valley. The terms, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we shall die, were assigned to Socrates, but it was Imhotep. In fact, the first Olympic Games held in Olympia, Greece, were not in reward of sportsmanship, physical strength, or brinkmanship. Instead, it was public ceremonial worship by the Greeks of the African god, Ammon. Most European gods were of African descent and were given European names. The Greeks gave the African god Ammon the name of Zeus and called Jupiter, by the Romans. Imhotep had his name changed to Asclepius by the Greeks and Aesculapius by the Romans. Also, while I'm thinking about it, the greatest contribution of the Egyptian Nile Valley to the world was its excellent educational system. In the Kemet educational system, the ultimate aim was for a person to become one with God, to become like God or to become God-like through the revision of one's own need of how God is revealed in the person. This was one of the highest endowments a family could give a son in those days. When the boys, for back then, it was for boys only. But when the boys got into the temple or grand lodge, they were expected to study for 40 years in subjects such as grammar, arithmetic, rhetoric and dialectic, geometry, astronomy, music, architecture, masonry, carpentry, engineering, sculpture, metallurgy, agriculture, mining, forestry, art and magic. Now you know why education is important to me as well, Jala. If you don't know the truth, anyone will create a lie, and you easily believe it. Abooksigun stood up and returned to the front of the room. Is it right to say that Egypt was truly the cradle of civilization? By grooming European scholars and teaching the world the true essence of civilization. You see, no thought or learning is alien to Africa. No one can erase the historical contributions Egypt has given to the world. The African man and woman brought the light of civilization to this world. Abooksigun flipped through a few pages of a book, he had on his desk. Here we go for your assignment. The twin side as Abooksigun continued, Marco Polo, visiting the Pandian kingdom, said to have been the darkest man, the most highly esteemed and considered better than the others who are not so dark. In truth, these people portray their gods and idols as black and their devils as white as snow. They say that God and all the saints are black, and the devils are white. More than 1,000 years before the foundations of Greece and Rome, proud and industrious black men and women known as the Dravidian erected a powerful civilization in the Indus Valley. African kings in India drove the region's commerce, culture, and belief systems from those origins. Dr. Clyde Winters, who wrote Afrocentrism, Myth or Science, said Ethiopians have had very intimate relations with Indians. Before the Middle Ages, the Ethiopians ruled much of India. These Ethiopians were called the Nai. It was the Nai who created Sanskrit. Sanskrit was the ancient Indo-European language of India. The Hindu scriptures and classical Indian epic poems are written and from which many northern Indian or Indic languages come. The earliest mention of the Nai appears in the Ramayana. They are also mentioned in the Mahabharata. In the Mahabharata, we discover that the Nais at the capital city in the Deccan and other cities spread between the Humna and Ganges as early as 1300 BC. The Dravidian classic, the Chilapatikaram, clarified that the first great kingdom of India was Naganadu. The Nai probably came from Punt, Ethiopia, since the Puntites were the greatest sailors of the ancient world. In the Kemetic inscriptions, the Puntit ports of Alkulit, Himo, and Tikaru, which corresponds to Edulus, Amazon, and Tigre. Even the legends of India revere the black race that laid the foundation of their civilization, and the holiest books of India also affirm that enlightenment came from Ethiopia. The first god of India was a dreadlocked black man called Shiva. Banjani Kebu took a deep breath. That was a mouthful, but he said I love that to say this. I want you to write a report on other black rulers from India. Now, class dismissed. 2 weeks had passed, and their assignments were due. Banjani Kebu walked into the class. Okay, girls, today we're going to do your reports, and then we'll learn some fighting techniques. Jala, you love animals so much. Let's see if they can fight alongside you in battle, and Anaya, we will incorporate some dance moves in your fighting skills. Now, I can't dance, but maybe we can work together on that. Jala rushed to the front of the class, and Anaya followed and stood next to her. Jala cleared her throat. Okay, Sasada Koha Barbak was an Ethiopian who conquered the Bengal kingdom and established the Absi dynasty. It was a city. We also know the city as Sidi, Sdi, Sidi, Swahili, and Absi. They were an ethnic group that inhabited India and Pakistan. The Sidi are members descended from the Bantu peoples of the East African region. One of his own assassinated Sasada Koha Barbak shortly after coming to power. The man who took his place was Malik Andil Khan Sultan. Upon assuming the throne, Malik Andil Khan changed his name to Saifuddin Abul Muzaffar Firuz Shah. The end. Jala quickly took a sequous smile on her face. After turning a few paces, Anaya stood up and placed her notes to her side. Jamal al-Din Yaqut began his rise to power in Delhi as Absi. Absi were African and Abyssinian Slavs in pre-British India. The name derives from the Arabic word Abbas through its Persian form. Such Slavs were employed by the chiefs of Muslim India, especially in the Deccan. They were believed to have great physical prowess and ability and a lack of personal ties, which promoted loyalty. Many Absi rose to office, and some became independent. The most famous of them was Malik Ambar of Ahmadnagar, who defied the Mughals, who controlled much of South Asia during this time. Absi in western India, the cities of Janjira, commanded the fleet of the Bijapur Sultan and became independent chiefs. They defied the Marathas and transferred their allegiance to the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb. They accepted British supremacy and maintained their state until it was integrated with the Bombay state of the new Indian Union. He was one of many enslaved Africans of East African descent frequently employed by Muslim monarchs as mercenaries and royal security teams. Shortly after his employment began, the then reigning sovereign Queen Raziya, the first female monarch of Delhi, took a liking to him. They promoted him to the royal courtier, and later rose to occupy the important post of superintendent of the royal stables. She awarded him the honorable title Amir al-Kail or Amir of Choices, and later the Machiger Amir al-Umara or Amir of Amirs. The Turkish nobility also had dealings in the region at the time. Already resented a woman ruler by the Muslim nobles and clerics. Queen Razia's relationship with a Slav, both considered racially inferior to the Turkish nobles who ruled the Sultanate, alienated the nobility and clerics and soon provoked open rebellion and conspiracy. His haters eventually killed off Jamal al-Din Yaqut. Anaya started singing and waved her hands across both of her shoulders. Take the jatters off, take them jatters off. Jala interrupted, laughing. There was another guy named Malik Sarwar. Malik was used a lot back then, and it's the Semitic term translated into king recorded in East Semitic and Arabic and as milk in Northwest Semitic, during the late Bronze Age. But Malik Sarwar was also described as Abbasi and became the governor of Jaunpur, a sultanate close to Delhi. Under the title of Malik US Sarwar King of the East. He captured Jaunpur province. According to the history of medieval India, Malik Sarwar received the title of Kahaihan, was appointed as the governor of Jaunpur, and received his title of Malik US Sarku from Sultan Nasiruddin Mahmud Sados Tughlaq. Established himself as an independent ruler, took the title of Atabaki Assam, and suppressed the rebellions in Itaba, Koil, and Kannauj. He also brought Kara, Abad, Sandila, Dalmau, Baraich, Bihar, and Tirut under his control. The Raj of Hatnagar and the ruler of Lucknow acknowledged his authority and sent him many offences. After his death, he was succeeded by his adopted son, Malik Karamfal, who took the title of Mubarak Shah. Malik Sarwar and his 5 successors Malik Mubarak Karamfal, Ibrahim Shah, Mahmud Shah, Bikan Khan, and Yusansa, Alkayet Sarikins ruled the kingdom of Jaunpur for a little less than a century. They were all black Indo-Africans Kayed Abbasis or the Ethiopians in India. This was the period of peace and prosperity in the history of Jaunpur, with remarkable achievements in the fields of art, architecture, education, trade, and commerce. Malik Ambar, one of the most famous among the Indo-Africans. Anaya interrupted. His original name was Shambhu, born in Harar, Ethiopia. After he arrived in India, he raised an army and achieved tremendous power in the West Indian realm of Ahmadnagar. A brilliant diplomat, tactician, and administrator. Later, he broke away from Bijapur and built an independent mercenary army of over 1,500 African, Arab, and local Dakhani men. Joining the state of Ahmadnagar, he imprisoned King Murtaza II, naming himself a regent minister. Amar promoted minorities of various ethnic groups to critical positions and implemented financial, educational, and agricultural reforms. Banjeni Kebu was proud of his daughters and said with a smile, "Yes, there were many other powerful Abisi in the political scene of India." Chinggis Khan, the Prime Minister to Nizam Mulmul Bani, King of Ahmadnagar. These men are just a few of the Abyssinian, Abbasi, Ethiopian, and Dravidian rulers, leaders, and wise men who shaped India. Yes, all were of African origin. Now, let's go outside and fight. The twins ran outside, they enjoyed challenging one another, and Banjeni Kebu enjoyed it as well. Later that night, as Queen slept on the other side of the bed, Banjeni Kebu grabbed his pen and pad, for it had been a long time since he had written anything. Brutes. The sun shines. That sun, from that sun, are Kayed Ras. Those rays fall and scatter across this planet Kayed Earth. In a form that are nutrients, that this planet feeds on. Now, everything here on this planet needs these nutrients. From the birds, to the bees. Flowers, trees, and seeds. Light reflects this energy, darkness absorbs it. And this has been the dilemma. When the seeds are planted, what starts its growth? What makes it grow? Roots. Roots form and grow, that's the beginning of your glow. And from that scatter. That ray. Yes, that same glows, and you grow. Some plants have stems, and sometimes, later down the road, some of them stems become branches. But that is for those of us who are plants, because you have your trees. Which are plants, but on a higher degree. Another story, another theme. This light I spoke about earlier has to go through this same process as the darkness. But it's harder, for light hinders darkness. But that is not what I'm talking about at this time. Again, another story, another theme. Right now, it's those roots. Roots help you grow, without it, you just won't glow. They separate to spy our roots, teach us to forget our past. This is what you should gain from those branches, from those stems. All you got was the dirt from the earth. So we just deal without roots? No. I've forgotten the scatter from the rays, that rays from that sin that causes you to glow? Remember. Light reflects this energy, darkness absorbs it as long as you raise it. So, raise your family, raise your family. Be a family, become roots, that brings forth a tree. When the twins were 15, Frederick got word from home that a dear relative had died and asked Banjeni Kebu and Queen if they were interested in seeing Botswana, Africa. They took the twins along, leaving the rest behind for Auntie Sebe, who was happy to watch. Abooksigun was the youngest, being just a year old. Anaya was so excited when she found out she was going to Africa with Friedrich. She started dancing and singing by an ancient artist named Genuine entitled 550 watt, 5.50 watt. 5.50 watt. That's my dress. That my dress. Jala was always playing with the animals, and they seemed to listen to her every word, naming them unusual and different names. On the day of their departure, she asked Friedrich, "Can we bring an animal back?" Friedrich smiled. "Did you know that the Ethiopian soldiers used lions, bees, wasps, and elephants in wars against colonizers? And Ethiopia has never been colonized. They trained these creatures to fight their enemies." Jala smiled. "Of course I do, Uncle Fraida." Friedrich shook his head, smiled, and looked at Banjeni Kebu. "Of course, she does." Jala laughed and shouted, Sao. They both said together, never forget. Friedrich surprised the group on the day of their departure. Eve made outfits for our trip. Please, take this and put them on. They are our traditional dress for my country, and by the way Jala, these are not real animal skin. Friedrich and Banjeniekebu wore lion skin kaedatsega, then wrapped with a keras, a rubber blanket usually made from animal leather, a skin cap, sandals, and belt towels. Belts of towels were allowed only for warriors, copper wire necklaces, bead strings, and armlets. Queen wore a kiva with a beautiful mosses and then was covered with a keras and wrapped with colorful necklaces, bracelets, rings, and earrings. Jala and Anaya wore mosses and kiva. We must make our route where there are fewer Albanians, Friedrich said, pulling out a map on his tablet. We go as far south as our territory allows and then do east making stops here and here, depending on the gales. We might go here. Banjeniekebu trusted Friedrich's decisions, and they headed on their journey, leaving Jom and Ove in charge until their return. They finally arrived at their destination after 3 days and parked their skycrafts just a few miles away, for the elders of Botswana were like the elders of Telul, and didn't want to frighten them. As they walked toward the village, they were met by a group of warriors who saw the skycrafts. We come in peace, I am Friedrich, son of Edwin. To pay homage to his sister Cat of Pommel. A warrior from the back came to the front, you can't be Friedrich, son of Aina, for he has the face of a crow and the body of a giraffe. And then the warrior ran to Friedrich and embraced him with tears in his eyes. Friedrich embraced him back with tears in his eyes. Nephew shouted. Friedrich said unto his nephew, how old are you? 36, now he replied. Friedrich smiled. You're just as ugly now as you were then. His nephew laughed. You would now, for everyone said we look like twins. Banjeniekebu and his family laughed, and Banjeniekebu said, you two do look alike. Friedrich introduced Banjeniekebu and his family as they walked the rest of the way to the village. The women were black dresses, and the men wore black hats and a piece of black or blue cloth with a matching necklace and bracelet according to their customs. Friedrich took a minute to explain to Jala and Anaya about his culture. When someone dies in Botswana, the Botswana believe they become ancestral spirits whom they praise. These ancestral spirits have the power to cause sickness and bad luck for the living. To prevent the spirit from causing harm, their family makes sure the funeral properly honors their memory. Typically, when an elderly family member dies, it's considered a natural death. Anaya interrupted Friedrich. But when a young person dies, it's considered the cause of witchcraft, evil spirits, or unhappy ancestors. Friedrich said. Banjeniekebu has taught you well, Anaya said. This we taught ourselves when you told us we were coming. Friedrich was impressed. Well, you are right, and we made it in time for the night vigil, which is tomorrow evening until sunrise, so get you some rest. Mourners pay their respects, pray, sing, and give speeches to honor the deceased. Friedrich walked to the front, grabbing an old, torn book. You want to read this? It's a story we repeated for centuries on special family occasions, and this is suited for family and love. It was first written by our ancestor, Pastor Evelyn Kelama, over 1,000 years ago when they celebrated Christmas. My great-aunt taught me the meaning and the purpose of family. She would read this to me from a kid until the day he left home and this book. Holding the book above his shoulders was on tears. He cleared his throat and wiped his tears. My first exposure to what love looks like. As I recall from my childhood, they beat the odds as a black couple despite the devastating effects of 250 years of slavery preceding them, 50 years of Jim Crow following them, and 45 years of rampant discrimination following them. He grew up not in a ghetto but in a close-knit community, a village. During this time, Black people were still struggling to rebuild after the worst human Holocaust in modern history, the winds of which were still blowing hard, carrying the debris of discrimination and destruction we are still trying to recover from. A time when Black folk banded together in tightly knit communities for their safety and protection, yelling, and help through extreme times. And it did take a village to raise a child, and a family to raise a nation. My grandparents epitomized strength, character, dignity, righteous prayer, and self-respect. They believed in a hand up, not a hand down unless you were picking someone up. They barra diagonal we were poor by societal standards but sometimes didn't know because the family unit and the coping skills often made up for what we lacked in material needs. The elders did all they could to protect the children from the harsh reality of a world ravaged by racist hatred and classism, and oppression on all sides. But sometimes, reality penetrates. And sometimes, the need overwhelmed the efforts to fill the void. And one bitterly cold winter, around the holidays of Thanksgiving and Christmas, the need was overwhelming. For our family, work was scarce. Money too tight to mention. My grandpa, we called him Papa, was not feeling well. He walked on a cane from severe arthritis in one leg. From years of hard labor in the cotton fields and on farms, working with folks, lands as a sharecropper. My grandmother's name was Carrie, but affectionately called her B. Why we never knew. She called him Jimmy, but his name was James, and old man if she was irritated. It was not unusual for sometimes 2 or 3 families to be living under one roof. They piled on top of each other. Family trumped comfort. That winter, several of my cousins and stayed with my grandparents while our parents were often out of town working or looking for work. It was Christmas, and we had nothing. No money for presents or a tree or food. I remember one of the few times I saw my grandmother cry. She always kept up a strong front for her family. No matter how much pain she was in this time, she couldn't hold back the tears, watching with kids, watching other families on a black and white television talking about trees and presents we wanted for Christmas. One of us asked her, "Moi," which was our nickname for her, "are we getting a Christmas tree too?" I was around 10. I remember asking my grandma why she was crying. As usual, she wiped her tears away and tried to cover them with a smile. However, my grandfather had stood in their bedroom doorway, silently watching her cry. He didn't say anything. He just grabbed his hat and coat and that cane of his, went over, kissed my grandma on the forehead, and said, "I'll be back in a little while, Bia." She quickly wiped the tears she never intended for him to see and asked, "Where are you going on that leg in this cold, Jimmy? You can't be up all night." He just winked at her and said, "Don't worry. I'll be back." He headed up the road, limping on that cane. Hours passed. Every so often, my grandma would look outside for him. I did too. I knew she was worried. Something about your parents or grandparents coming home back then was always a comfort for us kids. We knew we'd be okay. It was almost dusk when a sleek, expensive car pulled up, and my papa got out. A white man drove. Papa called to us kids to come help. "Get these bags out of the car." We excitedly ran over each other to do so. The white man was with got out, opened the trunk, and pulled out a Christmas tree and a bag of decorations. He brought it into the yard and helped put the dozen or so bags of groceries and gifts on the porch. Papa thanked him for his help. They shook hands. The white man whizzed the Texas hat and the dead boy said, "Welcome, Jimmy. If I get more work for you in the future, I'll let you know. Merry Christmas to you." He got in that big expensive car and drove off. Papa turned to us all and said, "What is all standing round here for? Help your grandma get these bags and that tree in the house and get to decorating. And don't all look in those bags either. Except the ones with the groceries." The smile on my grandma's face was priceless. This time the tears in her eyes were of joy and wonder. The writer that I am, I later chronicled that moment and that hook between them in my journal for later stories. I heard her whisper to him under the screams and shouts of me and my cousins, "Old man, what you doing out there working in this cold on that leg like that?" My papa gave that sly smile of his. The wood lulled me away. "Now, leave me alone, Bill. A man ain't got no prayer if he can watch his family suffer and don't do nothing about it if he can." She patted his chest and smiled, the way she always did when she was pleased with him. He told her he was going to walk up to a neighbor's house a minute to see if they still needed food. He watched my papa limping on that cane, walking up the road in the bitter cold. It was sleeting slightly. It was a moment. Frozen in time for me, the image of a real man, a father, a grandfather, a neighbor, and a friend, who put the needs of his family and others above his own pain. It was an image I have never forgotten. Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to one and all. Closing the book, he said to the crowd. God inspired me to be old man for my people. With tears rolling down his face, Friedrich took a seat when Anaya got up. I would like to sing a song for my Uncle Frida. She grabs Jala and plays the instrumental to a song entitled Stairway to Heaven by a classic group named the Oyentes. They sang the song so beautifully that the crowd stood up. Some were crying, and the rest cheered. Queen smiled. That was such a beautiful song. I didn't know you guys could sing like that. I've heard you sing phrases but not an entire song, and Jala, Lord, I never knew. Jala blushed, and Anaya said with a smile. Thank you, we sing to Jala's animals all the time. Friedrich started crying during Anaya's song and achieved from the crowd as he thought about all the times he spent with his and cat, but a simply quiet chair cat, just walking with no destination. After trying to hold in his grief for so long, he broke down in tears. Jala felt his sorrow and touched Anaya. Uncle Frida needs US. Anaya looked at Jala and said with tears, what are we here for? Let's go. They saw Friedrich ahead of them, so they ran to him. Uncle Frida, they screamed until he finally turned around, wiping his face from the tears. He just needed to take a walk. Anaya began to speak but was captivated by the view as she started looking around. Everywhere he turned, he finds some of the most beautiful scenery. That sunrise makes it even more beautiful. Friedrich smiled. This is my home, Botswana, the birthplace of all modern humans. Home of the Bushmen or San and Khoi people, which also spoke the oldest Khoisan language. The girls knew he was about to give them another history lesson but let him speak his mind and just listen. Until Europe and the rest of them came along, our official language was Tswana. However, English has crept its way in. The British called it Bechuanaland, but it was renamed Botswana. It used to be one of the poorest countries in the world and has since transformed itself into one of the world's fastest-growing economies, with mining as its top resource and technology. It was also among the hardest hit by the HIV/AIDS epidemic during that time. I wonder how did that happen? Shaking his head as he continued. The country's name means Land of the Swan, referring to the dominant ethnic group in Botswana. The term Botswana was originally applied to Swan, which is still the case. However, it has also generally become used as a demonym. A pause. A demonym is a word that identifies residents or natives of a particular place, usually derived from the name of the place or that of an ethnic group. Botswana is the plural form, and Motswana is the singular form for all citizens of Botswana. The Europeans say Botswana, we say Botswana and find that word offensive. Friedrich paused. You guys probably know all this, right? They shook their heads and smiled. Well, do you know that? Looking at Anaya. There was a man named Anaya, a Professor James Anaya, who was a special reporter for indigenous peoples, who? Anaya interrupted. That's the Uncle Frida we know. Jala, laughing, said, yep, just talking and talking. And they all laughed. They walked a few yards further, and they heard a sound. Jala said, that's crying. She ran to the sound, and there were two giant calves, one stripped and the other albino. Friedrich walked up and looked around for a mother giant. They must be lost, for it's strange for these calves to be left alone. Jala walked up to one of the calves and picked it up. Fireball. Friedrich said. Why don't you name him, and you'll never see it again? Jala smiled. You will see him again, cause I'm taking him home. Anaya picked up the other pup, is because says weak. As they returned to the village with the puppies in their hands, Friedrich looked at Vangeniekebu and shook his head. You already know we have new family members, don't we? Vangeniekebu said to Friedrich, and smiled, yes, you do. The end of this chapter. Please support my content by going to these links below. Visit Cush Sovereignty store @vampire for Max, desserts, and more is on its way. Link is in the description.